On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, the number one reason people file for bankruptcy.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and we've got George here with us in studio, George Curbello. Welcome, George.
What's up? Your financial coach is excited to be here again.
Last week, we talked about the 5 money rules, and we've got a couple other articles that we're going to talk about this week. Before we get there, I do want to talk real quick about one of our sponsors, Sam Cohen, owner of Attorneys First Insurance. They do E&O for attorneys and title companies, even attorneys and title companies that have had a claim in the past. Sam can get you coverage. So great way to support the firm is if you know an attorney or title company that may have slipped up in the past and gotten a claim against them. Sam can still find them potential coverage. And so you can contact him, Sam, at Attorneys First or attorneysfirst.com. But last week we talked about 5 money rules, and George found a couple other articles that we thought would be good for you all to talk about today. And the first one, really not really an article.
Well, I mean, great philosopher. I got to tell you, the great philosopher, Snoop Dogg, D-O-double-G.
D-O-double-G.
Posted on his Instagram a few weeks ago. It was funny, but it was 20-year-old money mistakes.
Now, this is not mistakes that are 20 years old. This is
right,
mistakes that 20-year-olds make.
All right, again, here's the lawyer again coming out. Thanks there, Sean. Now, go ahead.
How many of these mistakes can stand the test of time for 20 years? Probably these
Probably
can.
all of them, yeah. What's one that stood out for you, my friend?
The one that stood out to me was partying. I guess. I mean, and really all it is just those, it's what, 9 of them. And it's those words. And so just the word is partying. So I guess what he's talking about is blowing money on parties, I guess.
Endless spending. Because what do you do at parties? You go to the bar or you go to a place itself. You're clubbing maybe and so it's drinks, just eating out, doing that. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that's where we're the one that's for partying.
Yeah, getting kind of buzzed and going to Taco Bell afterwards. And
well, in his case, it might be his defense. It might be more high, but I'm okay with that.
Probably more high than drunk in Snoop's case. Yeah, true. What about one that stood out to you?
So we were talking about it last week as well, but it was like the expensive. Again, dating and relationships is hard enough, but of course, expensive dates was one of his categories. Yeah. That 20-year-olds, that have their money mistakes. So I guess, taking her out or him out to the nice 5-star restaurant compared to, or the Taco Bell, like you had just mentioned itself. So maybe that seemed to be one that stood out. It was kind of funny. But the other one too was 100 sneakers.
Yeah, 100 sneakers. You don't need 100 pair of shoes.
You got 2 feet.
Yeah.
But but you have to have the special edition for the Air Force. Again, we're going to sound so old right now, so just fair warning.
I've got a pair of brown shoes.
Oh, he's very old.
I got a pair of black shoes for dress shoes. I've got the pair of sneakers that I currently use for running. And then when those sneakers get too old, they become my everyday sneakers, and I buy a new pair of running sneakers.
Sean, are we related? Because I feel like you're saying what I do.
Well, and I've also got I've got flippers or slippers, not flippers, slippers.
That just got funny there. Thanks.
Flippers. Yeah, I walk around in a pair of swimming flippers. So the one thing that I do have a ton of are flip-flops, because I'm Florida. I'm a Florida native. I'm born and raised in Florida. I've got a ton of flip-flops. But again, I mean, I think the most recent pair of flip-flops that I bought, my newest pair of flip-flops, I think is still probably like 10 years old.
Oh, okay. Yeah. My wife would have been already like, okay, change now.
Yeah, I literally wait till they get holes in them or they break before I toss them and get new ones. And a lot of times, my dad doesn't like wearing flip-flops anymore, so he gave me all of his old flip-flops, and we've got roughly the same size feet. So I don't mind hand-me-downs.
We are learning more about Sean every episode. Thank you there, Sean.
Based on last week's 5 money rules, I guess hand-me-downs are probably something he would rail against.
Oh, no, right? No, you can't do that.
So if you want to hear what we're talking about, go back and listen to last week's episode about the 5
Catch up
rules.
Already.
That was kind of fun.
Yeah, and then he has the other boring ones. You got to have a budget, poor credit, loans,
eating out.
So pretty standard. I love it though. It's done a little humor at the beginning of the episode, but it's again, look at some of the stuff here. Budget, no budget. It's definitely not having intentionality with your money. All of these kind of things play into, preventing us from actually doing. But as a 20-year-old, these are your money mistakes.
Here are your money mistakes. I'll try to post, if I can figure out how to post the screen capture, I'll post it to the show notes if you want to see it. But,
Absolutely.
Sort of following up on our show from last week, we found a couple other articles. So this one, again, I'll link this one to the show notes as well. But a lot of you know Rachel Cruz does a lot of talking about finance and investing and finance topics. And she had a YouTube video that we'll post a link to, the number one reason people go bankrupt. And I'll admit, I didn't watch the whole video. I watched for the first few minutes to get the big reveal. And then I think I'd heard all I needed to hear, and I kept going. But what is the number one reason people go bankrupt?
Sean, I thought you had mentioned marriage. No, I'm kidding. That's not that was last week's.
That's the number one reason people get divorced.
Got confused, but I threw this one at Sean. Obviously, right up his wheel, kind of wheel alley itself. But one of the things here, it's that medical debt that seemed to be the thing we stood. I know we did an episode about it, but that seemed to be the thing that stood out specific to bankruptcy today. So again, your opinion, my friend, because this is your profession, my friend. What are you seeing, and are we agreeing with the assessment?
So a couple things. First, the episode we did for medical debt was with Dr. Virgie. Mm-hmm. That was episode 325, all around her book, Crush Medical Debt. So if you want to listen to that episode, go back and listen to episode 325, which is Crush Medical Debt with Dr. Virgie. But the reason that I kind of clicked off or didn't watch the entire thing start to finish is that's not really what I found in my bankruptcy practice.
Right.
And that may be part of the reason that my bankruptcy practice actually started was because I did a lot of foreclosure defense. And I've said before, you can't really understand foreclosure defense unless you know how a bankruptcy works. You can't really defend someone from a foreclosure without understanding how a bankruptcy works. Right. And so a lot of my early bankruptcy cases were all foreclosure related. And I even remember getting into an argument, not really an argument, but getting into an argument with an opposing attorney. I had filed a bankruptcy for somebody because I was trying to help them save their house, and they had a car. And I got into it with the attorney representing the car creditor, the company that gave the loan on the car. And he's like, you need to do this and that, and I want blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, dude, whatever. It's a car. I'm trying to save the person's house. Right. I don't really care about the car. Now, obviously, my bankruptcy practice evolved and got into other debts and debt settlement and medical debts and credit card debts and all that kind of stuff. And I did go back and look at a lot of my old bankruptcy clients and why a bunch of them filed. And for me, what it really came down to was loss of income.
Yeah.
They file because of loss of income. They get to that point where they have too much debt and they can't afford to repay it back. Now, maybe that's medical debt. They got too much medical debt and they need to pay it back, but it's credit card debt, lawsuit debt, IRS debt. There's a whole bunch of different reasons. So in my practice, I have had people come to me because of medical debt.
Right.
But it's not the number one reason in my own practice.
See, and that's the thing we're looking at is we know that the medical debt seems to be a rising problem itself, but I totally agree with you. I think right now, I'd imagine it's got to be the loss of income. If you lose your job because of medical reasons or because of the debt itself that we're accumulating from either medical loan or it's loss of income's got to be the big. If you can't pay your bills, what do you do? And that's for me, it makes a lot more sense. At least seeing what you're seeing in your practice as well.
Yeah, and again, I've had people that have had a bunch of medical debt, and that's the reason that they filed, but. A lot of times it's just, they have to file, and by the way, I have medical debt.
I gotcha.
In my mind, it's not. Now, maybe, I know, obviously, Rachel Cruz is trying to get, nationwide listeners, and so maybe nationwide that's a leading cause. And I know even with talking with Dr. Virgie back in the Crush Medical Debt episode, there are statistics that support that medical debt is a big driver of bankruptcy. But again, for me, for my practice, not really the number one reason. But, you all can tell us what you think. I'll link to the article. You all can tell us what you think. Hopefully it won't affect our Patreon
Look at this guy.
See how I
like
wove that in there?
He's learning, people. He's learning. I like it.
So we did talk last week. We are launching a Patreon page for those of you that want to support me and George and the Crushing Debt podcast, help us offset some of the production costs that we're incurring here to get the show out to you. We do have the Patreon page. Hopefully by the time this episode comes out, the Patreon page will be live. If it is, I'll certainly post a link in the show notes. If not, we will definitely let you all know when that's live. Again, if you want to support us, one way to do it would be to go to the Patreon page and toss us a couple of bucks. Another way to do it is what you're already doing, which we really, really appreciate. Subscribing, which is free. And whatever podcast player you happen to be on, whatever podcast player you happen to be listening to, if you want to subscribe, we definitely appreciate that. We do not need you to give us money, but if you want to support us, we will not turn it down either. Another way you can support us if you want is leave us a review. I mean, I know a lot of podcasters will say, leave me a review. It drives this, and it doesn't drive anything. So that's why I really never have asked for reviews. But if you like the content and you want to give us a review, it's kind of social proof. So other people that are looking for this type of a podcast will see it and will let us know. Yeah, so leaving a review is more just social proof. So as people are looking for this podcast or looking at other podcasts and they see good reviews, they're more likely to listen and then subscribe to this show. So if you want to leave a review, certainly we won't.
A positive one would be nice, though.
Positive one would be nice, but we're not going to turn down any kind of reviews.
That means you're listening, even if it's not a so good one, too.
Exactly. So one of the other articles, we'll link in the notes again, one of the other articles that George found here, again, from CNBC, from a writer named Jessica Dickler, which we'll link to in the notes. But again, nearly half of all Americans, sort of following along with that Rachel Cruz, the number one reason people file for bankruptcy, nearly half of all Americans are falling deeper in debt as inflation continues to boost costs. And so basically what she's saying is with inflation going up and hitting highs, interest rates are going up, interest is going up, the cost of gas, the cost of food, the cost of everything is going up. We just had our homeowners association meeting last night, and we're getting ready to do the budget for our homeowners association. A lot of that kind of stuff is going up, the supplies that we need to run and manage the association. Americans' overall satisfaction with their financial condition now stands at a 12-month low. 43% of consumers expect to add to their debt in the second half of the year. So, again, this is a big reason that people file bankruptcy, is that the debt just becomes overwhelming.
What do people do? Like, I mean, obviously in your practice, when they're coming to you, are they already at the last leg? If that's, or is it more of just like a feeling like, what do we do next? How do we manage these kind of things? Like when they're coming to you, what's that feeling? What are they going through?
It's a bunch of different stages. So yeah, there are times where they come to me and they basically hit the end of the line and they really have no other options. But I've always tried to tell people that bankruptcy is just a tool. And so I'm not always going to automatically jump to the bankruptcy option. I mean, maybe we can negotiate away some of the debt. Maybe they're what we call judgment proof and they got nothing that people can take. And so, it's not going to be an issue that way. So, sometimes people do come to me when they're at the very end and we got to talk about bankruptcy, but there's other ways to eliminate the debt.
No, that totally makes sense. And what I'm trying to figure out too is, with the higher prices, everything that we're going through itself, is that a reflection of like people not making enough to make ends meet? Are we spending enough? Because we're running up debt. Yeah. But the question is, really for me, is it more of that we're just, again, living, we had that ego thing last week, right? It was, are we living above our means and we're just continuing to kind of push those as the prices keep going up? We still got to eat, but we still want to go out. We want that car, but we want the new stuff. Yeah. Like what are we thinking? What are you thinking, is causing some of this? So
it's interesting. I was listening to one of the other shows that I listen to, and they were talking about, it was the Stacking Benjamin show, which is a huge show. You don't need us to necessarily plug them, but they were talking about with the cost of things going up and starting with COVID, it was the run on toilet paper, and then the run on baby formula, and then the run on used cars. It just seems to be that there's a run on something every couple of months or whatever that all started with COVID, and part of the issue is the government was giving away so much money to everybody in 2020 and 2021 because of COVID there has to be a way to repay that. We can't get into a situation where the government's just printing money that devalues the dollar.
Right.
And the way to correct all of that is inflation, and it's just a natural part of the economy. It will subside again at one point. It may continue to increase as we go, but there's really no way to repay what's owed other than to repay it, which means inflation.
See, but the problem you see, and I'm going to take the approach of, I don't care what you devalue in the economics. I just need to be able to eat, send my kids to school. What are we doing in those situations? For me, it's most people out there, they hear what you're saying. They totally, they get it.
Right.
But it's at the same time, that's not going to feed, or pay the bills or do those kind of things that we need to do. What are we doing? How do we help those folks itself? For me, I'm thinking education, talking to folks, maybe having that budget, because most of those people are just like spending because they have to. It's just more of I don't have a plan, but I got to make life happen.
Yeah. Well, and I think unfortunately that's the issue, is that inflation is going up faster than wages are going up. And so that's part of the issue. And something that we talked about last week, something that I don't even think I mentioned last week, one of the things my dad always used to tell me is that, if you get a raise, you don't have to spend all of that raise.
Good one.
If your income goes up, you don't have to spend all of that income. Maybe you save some of it. Maybe you go the other way and you say, you know what, I'm going to start to get used to living on 90% of my income, or 95% of my income, or 98% of my income, and I'll save that other 2%, 5%, 10%, whatever it is. And then when you get a raise, if you get a 10% raise, well, I'm only going to let myself spend 5%
Makes
of that,
sense.
and I'm going to put the other 5% away.
See, and that's Sean just gave you guys a good tip on how to build wealth when it comes to getting a new job or getting more money, because that's the other thing. Most of us, I'm going to go back. The ego tells us it's like, I'm making more money, especially if you make 20% more. It's automatically as your lifestyle goes up. And you're thinking like, oh, now I deserve, I'm entitled to these new things itself. And we have to sometimes step back and get that check where it's like, what's important in our life? Savings, investing. It sounds boring. I get it. But it's important to be able to have that long-term goal so that the next time a recession happens or the next time COVID happens, again, not another COVID, but you know what I mean?
Right.
We are better prepared, because most of us in our situations, if we're living paycheck to paycheck, you're not ready for those events. And what ends up happening, it hits us harder because we're not in the position to be able to manage through that weather, through that storm, through that issue that's happening.
Well, and the other thing we talked about this on a previous show as well is that, and especially going back to our DOGG philosopher.
I love that guy.
20-year-olds don't necessarily think about when I'm 65 and I want to retire. And that's what we talked about. It was, I think, episode 329 when we talked with Vince about, financial literacy. 20-year-olds aren't thinking, I want to retire when I'm 65. 20-year-olds are thinking, I want to go out and party tonight.
Exactly.
And again, I'm not saying that in a negative way. I was 20 at one point as well.
We did it too.
Yeah, we believe me, we made a lot of those mistakes. But more just from the perspective of that delayed gratification. I'm reading a book right now that talks about the delayed gratification of investing now so that you can retire earlier or retire later or whatever. And I think that's the point as well. I mean, the economy's going to do what the economy's going to do.
Yes, and the government and the printing of money and, all of these things. And that's the thing we have to really focus on, guys, is, how do we protect ourselves regardless of what's happening around us? And we always get told, bootstraps, got to take care of the business, go work hard, do all. But working hard doesn't mean that we don't, be smart with the money we earn, the things that are important to us. You got to make sure you're putting yourself in a position that, doesn't matter what's happening in the world around us, your family, your work, everything is taken care of and you're good.
Yeah. Now, that's one of the other points the author makes in this article. Nearly a quarter of American households have no emergency savings. Ugh. And I've seen statistics where there are some people that if you had to come up with $400 immediately, there's a lot of people out there that can't.
I think it's like 60% or something like that. And that's where, the basic necessity, what that tells me is if you get a flat tire or something happens to your car, you have to borrow in order to actually get that fixed. And that's scary.
Right.
And that's where we get into the situation. We don't go to the doctor, going back to medical debt, right? We don't go to the doctor because we can't afford the copayment or the deductible that's needed to be able to do those things. It drives some of our decisions, and it's one of those kind of things. Put yourself in a position where you're more in control of your money than anything else. For me, that's the tip of the day.
Yeah. I mean, this chart in the article, 23% of Americans have no emergency savings at all. 28% some savings, but not enough to cover 3 months worth. 22% savings could cover 3 to 5 months of expenses. 27% enough emergency savings to cover 6 months or more of expenses. So it's interesting. Kind of breaks down to a quarter. A little bit here and there, but
I mean that's good if you're thinking 47% of people have at least savings that can cover them for 3 to 6 months or more, that's a good number. But what is that going to cover? How is that going to, those are still some curious. I'm just curious about like the insecurities that fall into that. And how honest are we when we do polls too?
That's true too.
It's like, hey, I'm going to tell. Oh, this. Well, yeah, I'm doing.
I got
I'm doing
6
okay.
months.
I'm good. Yeah, it's like $600, but I'm good.
Yeah, tell the pollster I got 6 months worth. Where you're really like, I don't even think I have 6 minutes worth. Forget 6 months worth. So yeah, I mean, some of this may not be completely accurate, but again, it may get worse before it gets better. Part of this too, part of the article itself is the negative mindset.
Yeah.
It'll get worse before it gets better. Maybe not.
Maybe not.
So sometimes I like to read a lot of these articles and think to myself, well, that's good for my bankruptcy practice, because the more negative press that's out there, the more people are going to seek out somebody to help them with debt, with bankruptcy, with whatever. But at the same time, your household is your household. And so you may not be experiencing some of this stuff. If you are, come to me, come to George.
Yes, we can help.
There's plenty of other materials that are around that are out there. But if you're not, great. Ignore the bad news, listen to the good news, stay off social media. But, again, I'll link to the article if you want to read it. You can make up your own mind. You can contact us and let us know what you think. I mean, my email, George's email, is in the notes, so you can contact one of us. Let us know what you think after you read this article. So, other than that, what else is going on in your life, George?
Well, I'm still trying to help people. It is some tough times out there, but trying to give people the confidence, when they're in their lowest point, or just trying to get really the help they need to be able to take control of their money. That's the big thing itself. So I'm really helping out folks. I'm really having those conversations. As much as we'd like to think it's like, here's a budget, you're good. I'm trying to help people. Really, it's the habits. It's what are you doing each day to put you in a position to win, and that's what we need to focus on when we're trying to get onto that financial journey that we're all doing each day.
We're all trying. We're all trying to muddle through each day.
That's it, man.
Well, cool. Well, thank you, George.
Thank you, sir.
And a little bit of a shorter episode this week, but again, we'll put all the links to all the articles that we've discussed in the notes if you want to pull those articles. I'll try to get the picture of Snoop's meme here. I'll try to get that linked up to the podcast episode. But other than that, I want to talk real quick about our second sponsor, Mark Purvis, the longtime, since episode 1, editor of the show. In fact, we've got some work for him to do on this episode. Mark is a 20-plus year experienced Emmy award-winning videographer, and so he's created a website called LegacySpotlight.com, and the purpose of that website is to help you either record the stories of previous generations or record stories for future generations. And he does it in a way that's fun. He does it in a way that can preserve those memories well beyond your lifetime, well beyond your legacy lifetime. LegacySpotlight.com. That's Mark Purvis. But I think that'll wrap it up for this week's episode. Thanks again, George.
Thank you, sir, for having me as always. Looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely. So we'll wrap it there, and we hope that at the end of the month you have more money rather than at the end of the money you have more month. Thanks for listening to this week's episode, and we will catch you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law PL are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.